Hello, everyone. This is Adam Pintar with the ASQ Statistics Division with another lunchtime webinar for you. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Our speaker today is Daniel Brown. He is an RAB QSA Principal Auditor of Quality Management Systems. He's a co-owner of International Standards Training and Implementation, ISTI LLC, and the president of DB Performance Solution LLC. Dan has been a quality for over 30 years in a variety of industries, including chemicals, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, nuclear suppliers, sales incentives, warehousing and distribution, and machinery rebuilding and repair. He's held a variety of positions from technician to owner. He is also the lead auditor for Eagle Certification Group and the National Standards Authority of Ireland, NSAI. The title of today's webinar is Auditing 101. All microphones other than the presenters have been muted, so if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please use the questions interface in the GoToWebinar control panel. Dan will address questions at the end of the presentation. At this time, I'm going to hand things over to you, Dan, and thank you very much for presenting with the ASQ Statistics Division.
Thank you very much. And I guess all that just means I can't hold a job. I've moved around a lot in my career, done a lot, but I look forward to sharing this information. So you should be seeing my screen now, and I'll switch over into display mode. And oh, there we go. Okay, there it is. So again, the point of this is just to distill down a 3-day class into a 1-hour webinar to prepare you for the quality auditing portion of the CQA exam. There's some of my background there. As you prepare for the CQE exam, as you look at the body of knowledge, it talks about different types of ways that we know what it is that we know, whether we just remember it, understand it, apply, analyze, evaluate, or create. So that when we get to the body of knowledge in CQA for audits, you'll see types of audits. You just need to be able to apply your knowledge. Roles and responsibilities in audits, you need to be able to understand what those are. Audit planning and implementation, you need to be able to apply that information. And audit reporting and follow-up, again, apply that information. There's a practice exam up on the ASQ website, and from that practice exam, if the proportions work out, about 2 to 3% of the test is on quality audits, so it's not a large portion of the test, but as with any ASQ exam, you have to pass every part of the body of knowledge, and that includes audits. So it always helps to start with understanding exactly what it is we're talking about. So an audit is a document activity to verify by examination and evaluation of objective evidence, compliance of those elements of the quality system under review, to measure the degree of conformance and to the specified requirements and the effectiveness of the program. There's a lot of words there. All those words mean something, and we'll look at some of those key words coming up. Objective evidence, that which we're looking for. Think of all the cop shows. It's the exact same thing. It's objective, which means it's free from prejudice, bias, emotion. And it's evidence. It's something that we can look at, touch, see, hear. So it's physical. It can be a record. It could be the product on the floor. It could be the machinery. Testimonial. It can come from the interviews with the employees or management. The documents, it can come from data, quantitative or qualitative. Some additional definitions for audits. An audit observation is merely an item of objective evidence found during an audit. Observation by itself is not positive or negative. It does not mean another word for an opportunity. It is what it is. A finding is a statement of importance based on that observation. Again, finding by itself is neither positive nor negative, but a negative finding is a nonconformance, a condition that violates a requirement, and then we write that into a nonconformity to present to the auditee to get that corrected. Audit types. A product audit is an examination of a particular product or service to evaluate whether or not it conforms to requirements. So product audits are often part of source inspections, whether it's a government inspection or a key customer inspection. So how does that product conform to all the requirements for that product? Process audits, which is the understood state-of-the-art in third-party certification audits, is an examination of an activity to determine if the actions, the inputs, the outputs are in accordance with requirements. So when we audit a full system, we audit by looking at the individual processes to make sure each process works according to the way it's supposed to work, therefore keeping the system intact and making the outputs of the system meet requirements. So the quality system audit is documented activity to verify by examination, evaluation of evidence. So we've already looked at that definition. A management audit is a little bit different than other kinds of audits. It looks to see how effective the system is at meeting the requirements of the organization. So to assess compliance and whether the procedures, instructions, and the implementation of those meet pre-established goals and objectives. So for a third-party audit, internal audits, we really don't look at financial measures, but a management audit would look to see not only are we doing what we say we're going to do, but we're doing it in a cost-effective manner and meeting all the needs of the organization. Compliance audits assess the degree to which the auditee has met the requirements of the relevant specifications, contracts, regulations. And if you are in a regulated industry, obviously compliance audits mean conformance to those applicable regulations. And when you receive a inspection from a regulatory official, those are compliance audits. Registration audits, which I do a lot of, assess the conformity of the management system to voluntary standards for the purpose of attaining independent certification. So you've probably heard first, second, third-party audits, internal, external audits. First-party audits are internal audits where the organization audits itself. And that can even be done by an outside consultant, but because it's internally driven, it's still an internal audit, a first-party audit. A second-party audit occurs when there's a contractual relationship, customer-supplier. So when a customer audits its supplier, that's second party, that's an external audit. Third-party audits are also external, but there's no customer-supplier relationship, and those are independent registration audits, also regulatory compliance audits fall within third party. There's many different approaches to doing audits. A desk audit is performed solely through looking at the documents and records of the system. So if you go for initial certification, the first thing they do is a doc review, and then a readiness visit, and then the actual certification audit. That doc review is a desk audit, just sitting at a desk looking at documents. Element audits take a standard or contract or other specification and steps line by line through that document. How is the organization fulfilling those requirements? Department audit looks at doing the audits in terms of going into each department. We'll go to sales, we go to engineering, go to production, see what they're doing. Function audit looks similarly to a department audit, except it's focused on independent functions. So if one department, say engineering, has multiple functions, product design, process development, machine coding, then you look at those individual functions separately as part of the audit. A tracing audit typically follows the flow of product realization from the initial customer contact through delivering the finished good to the customer through sales, through shipping. There's also a way of doing a backward tracing audit. You start shipping and work your way back to sales. So in terms of standards that tie to the audits, there's different kinds of standards and they have different approaches. We're most familiar with the conformance standards, such as ISO 9001, IATF 16949, AS 9100. There's also guidance documents. I need to update my slides here. ISO 9000, 9004, 19011. You don't need to know what those are, but they're different guidance documents. 19011 is for doing audits. There's regulatory standards, the good manufacturing practices if you're in an FDA regulated industry, NQA, nuclear quality assurance if you're in the nuclear field. There's also consensus standards, such as SAE, ASTM. Those would be called out typically on a customer print that says, hey, these requirements apply to this sales activity. Who all is involved in the audit? Who are the stakeholders? And we typically think of the client, the auditor, and the auditee. Auditor can also mean lead auditor and other technical support to the audit. There's also the audit program manager that manages the audit function. And there's other people who benefit from the audit activities, but these are the ones that we need to focus on and be aware of for the exam. So who is the client and what are the responsibilities of the client? So the most senior management person for the organization, or at least that location, is the client. So if you're a multi-site company, the general manager of the location, the site manager, is the client. If you're a small company, then the client would be the owner, president, CEO. The client determines the need for and purpose of the internal audit and initiates the process. Determines who within the organization is going to have the responsibility for managing the audit function. What's the scope? What standard will we be certified to? Who the client receives the audit report, or at least the summary, and in all of the management system standards, that typically is done through the management review, that the audit results are communicated up to the chain of command. Also, the client has overall responsibility to determine follow-up actions. Typically, that's delegated to the auditee, but it's an escalation strategy. If the auditee doesn't respond, ultimately, the client is responsible to make sure that happens. The client also provides the budget, specifies priorities, typically through communication of risks and opportunities through the organization, approves the audit schedule, and has to provide support for the overall audit program. The auditee is the person receiving the audit. That's typically the department manager. In the case of a certification audit, it would be the management representative. That person informs employees about the audit, making sure that there's escorts for the full audit team, provide resources to the audit team, provide clear access to whatever facilities, equipment, evidence, employees cooperate with the auditors, and determine and initiate corrective actions to the audit findings themselves. Whole litany of responsibilities for the auditor. Make sure that the audit requirements are carried out, communicate those, plan and carry out individual assignments, document your observations, report the results, verify the effectiveness of actions on the reported audit findings, make sure that documents are properly safeguarded in the records of the audit. If it's a team audit, there's a lead to make sure they cooperate with and support the lead and the rest of the team. It's important for the auditor to stay within the scope of the audit. If it's an internal audit and you're only auditing engineering, but you've got an audit trail that takes you to purchasing, make those notes and follow up when you get to purchasing, but finish the engineering audit first before you go do the purchasing audit. And if you're a part of a team and someone else has the purchasing activity, pass those audit trails over to the individual doing the purchasing audit. Don't just go over there and potentially interrupt what another auditor is doing. Need to be objective. Don't let our own biases. It's very difficult to not want to interject our opinion of how things should be. The question is, are they doing what they say they're going to do? And does that activity conform to the requirements of the standard? Whether we like it or not is not the standard. Collect and analyze the information. Stay alert. Don't just rely on the words being told. Look around. Make sure that you're seeing the biggest picture that you can to the scope of the audit. And make sure that any conclusions that you derive from the audit can be supported with the objective evidence that you have gathered and referenced in your audit. And act in an ethical manner at all times. You're representing your company, your client, you're representing if it's a supplier audit, you're representing the customer. If it's a third-party audit, you're representing the registrar and the ISO scheme itself. Remember to keep this information that you gather during the audit in confidence. I had a case in the past where an auditor was talking about the audit in the cafeteria with her friends. I had to let that individual know she would never be doing audits again. So confidentiality is critical to the long-term success of the audit program. If it's a team, every team needs to have a leader that's overall responsible for the audit activity. And so in addition to all the responsibilities of an auditor, the lead has to be responsible for all the audit phases, selecting the team, making final decisions on who's going to do what findings there are, to present the audit results to management, to prepare and submit the final report, to comply with the audit requirements, to create the schedule, prepare working papers, brief and coordinate the team, make sure that during the audit that there's times for the team to get together and communicate. So the auditor that was covering engineering has a chance to talk to the auditor covering purchasing and share those concerns forward. Handling any disputes, any obstacles, and ensuring all the results are correct and complete. For internal audit, who manages the audit function? That's the audit program manager, typically the quality manager, making sure that there's a reporting relationship for the audit function that should be totally separate from the production function. Establish the authority, freedom from constraints, the boundaries of the audit activity, ensure adequate resources, establishing procedures, making sure that the auditors are identified and trained. Determine if audits will be done as a team or by individuals. All those are part of the responsibilities of the manager. Establishing the schedule, communicating ahead of time to confirm the dates with the auditees, determining priorities, looking to see what areas need to have additional focus and additional time, reviewing the overall performance of the audits, reviewing the auditor performance, and making sure that all of the results of the audits and the auditor performance get communicated to the top management for continual improvement of the audit program itself. As we look at individual audits, we need to determine the plan, the objectives. So for every audit activity, we need to be able to answer who performs and participates in that audit, what activity or system is being audited, where is the activity being performed, when are we going to do it, why are we doing it? Is it just for internal improvement? Is it to verify conformance to regulatory requirements? Is it being done for third-party certification? What's the driver? Why is this important? And how are we going to do it? Is it a checklist? Is it discovery? Is it by interviews? Is it a desktop? How do we want to do that? So all those should be answered in the audit plan. So every audit activity we need to prepare. The audit type, purpose, scope. So if it's a 9001 audit, then we know that we're limiting it to the quality management system. We're not looking at employee safety. We're not looking at the environmental impacts. We're looking at the quality impact and conformance to customer requirements. Obviously, if during the course of the audit, the auditor sees something of concern in safety or environmental, identify those, share them with the auditee, share them with top management, share it with the appropriate area manager for safety or environment. But that's not a finding within a 9001 internal audit or a 9001 certification audit. Determining resource requirements, identifying the roles and responsibilities if there's going to be teams. Otherwise, the auditor develops the schedule, communicates, makes sure that whoever is doing the audit has a technical understanding of the processes. That individual does not have to be an experienced welder to audit the weld activity, but they need to understand the mechanics of welding to know, is the process being followed correctly or incorrectly? And if the auditor has no understanding of welding, then at that point there should be a technical expert that supports the auditor brought in to be able to perform that evaluation. So make sure that the auditors know enough about the area being audited to effectively analyze conformity of the outputs. Make sure that the auditee has been contacted ahead of time, is ready and available for the audit as scheduled. Look at any relevant documentation, quality manual, procedures, instructions. If it's an internal audit, there's a whole lot of documentation that you have available for you. If it's an external audit, you might be very limited in what you can look at ahead of time to prepare. And in that case, you need to set aside time for the on-site audit to early in the audit to be able to look at the documentation before you go into the different areas. Look at the history. Past audits that have been done, corrective actions, customer complaints, non-conformance is reported, whether it's an internal audit, a supplier audit, or even a third-party audit. There's typically some history there to look at. And then prepare a checklist for third-party audits. Our checklist tends to be a blank piece of paper these days as we do process-based audits. That checklist may just be a process map or turtle diagram, or the process interaction diagram. For an internal audit, lots of people are still using a element-based checklist. We discourage that because it limits the interactions during the audits, but it's still a common and viable mechanism to manage the audit time and the results of the audit. When we look at the basis, an audit is a measurement of the system. Any measurement has to have a standard against which that item being measured is compared. So is it the 9001 standard? Is it the pharmaceutical good manufacturing practices? Is it an industry standard? Is it a customer contract? What is the standard? Make sure that's identified and called out and understood by the full audit team and the auditee. What policies and procedures apply to the audit? Well, even if it's just 9001 and there's no FDA, are there other laws and regulations that actually do apply to the work being done by that organization? Because all the management system standards require conformance to applicable regulatory and statutory requirements. So we need to identify what those are up front. If you don't know, then that's part of your discovery at the opening meeting is to ask for that information up front. Again, any contracts, any customer call out specifications, it's rarely just 9001 on its own. There's usually additional requirements that a little bit of search will identify what those requirements are. Get the audit scheduled, both the audit activities themselves and within the audit activity to schedule what's happening at that time. It's important to know with all the management system standards now, we don't expect to see all functions audited at the same frequency. If companies are taking a good risk-based approach, then they should be able to say this area, based on the criticality to meeting customer requirements, production, it is likely going to need more time for auditing than, say, shipping or document control. If you've had a lot of findings in document control or training in the past, then perhaps you need more audit activities or more audit time focused on those activities. So that's the audit program manager needs to define how often different things are audited. Who are the auditees for those activities? What needs, what resources do you need in order to fulfill that? And then getting the individual schedules prepared and submitted. Back in the 80s, it was common to do an unscheduled audit. You just walk in and say, hi, I'm here to do your audit. We've learned that doesn't work. And in order to drive out fear, we have to communicate ahead of time. And if there is a systemic problem in the organization, advance notice is not going to make that systemic problem go away. So we're many decades past the point where unannounced audits were a common thing. So we determine our strategy. Are we going to do a tracing method, process, department discovery method? I don't advocate the discovery method. You just show up in an area and start looking for what they're doing wrong. For a system audit, we prefer doing the process method of looking at the processes themselves, looking at the inputs, the outputs, the risks, and how are the processes being controlled and managed by the organization. How is the data being gathered? Through checklists, through questions, through document evaluation. What's the process? Do we need a formal sampling plan? I remember the days when I was doing pharmaceutical audits, we would look at the square root of n-1 to determine the sample size in audits. Now, the audits that I've been doing for the registrars, it tends to be we want to look at a good, solid cross-section of the activities, a good, solid cross-section of the employees. If it's a small business, it's oftentimes I'm seeing 100% of the employees, 100% of the products. In larger organizations, I try to still hit about 10% of the employees and at least the top 5 customers. I also try to hit some of the smaller customer products as well, just to make sure that all customer requirements are being fulfilled, not just the big ones. So logistics for audits include how many days, how many auditors, any safety equipment. Do I need my side shields? Do I need earplugs? Do I need safety shoes? All those we need to know ahead of time so that we've got the right equipment with us for doing the audit. Once we get on site, how far are things apart from each other? There's one audit that I do where there's 5 different buildings across town that I've got to get to. So I need to plan my audit accordingly so that the remote sites, I hit those all at once. So I make my way back to the building, the main building. Once I'm in the room, where are the break rooms? Where's the coffee pot? Where's the lavatory facilities? What's where internally? And I want to know the interior layout so that if purchasing is at one end of the building and shipping is at the other end and production's in between, I want to make sure that I can lay out my audit schedule, my audit activities, so I've got a logical flow through the building. I'm not going from one end of the building back to the other and rushing, trying to get everything done. So we developed the audit plan and all those things that we've talked about before, the auditor, the time, who the auditee is, that's written up into a plan then that is provided to the auditee, and it's part of the permanent audit records, and it becomes part of the audit report at the end. Distributed before the audit to the auditee, the team, and to the client. As we get into looking at historical auditee performance, we want to look at past audit activities. What were the audit findings in the past? Or have they been doing well and there are none? What customer feedback do we have? Not just complaints, is there positive feedback as well? Are there concerns that are being raised by customers that fall short of being a complaint requiring a corrective action response, but still show a negative trend? Are there repeat complaints of different things? all those factor into where we spend our time in the management system audit. What other corrective preventive actions do they have? Again, cutting across past audits, complaints, internal deviations. Are there any trends? Are there any things that pop up that say, we've got a problem with document control, or we've got a problem with maintaining tight tolerances? We need to be aware of that as we go out onto the floor and start doing our interviewing to try to understand what potential problems there are and to validate, is it actually under control, or are there further weaknesses that need to be dealt with? And certainly performance against goals. There need to be high-level organizational goals and goals and metrics for each process and each activity. How are those activities being measured? What are the results? How does that compare to the goal? And what's being done about it? We want to verify while we're doing our audit that we see that they are following through and doing what they claim to be doing. So a couple of slides here on creating checklists, following through. The important thing is that we need to have a good understand what questions we're going to ask before we get into the audit itself. A good auditor already knows the correct answers to the questions being asked so that we can gauge the response. Is it correct? If it's not, why not? Is it an individual wasn't properly trained? Is it that they're shortcutting? We want to validate by talking to multiple people. Are we getting the same answers? So is company practice shifted from what the procedures say, where the procedures never fully implemented? We need to understand all that. So by preparing questions ahead of time, then it helps us be efficient and effective at determining those concerns. So the checklist itself then becomes part of the final audit record. It provides the evidence of who we talked to, what the results, what the answers were, and that provides the objective evidence to support our nonconformities at the end of the audit. There's different ways of asking questions during the audit. There's unexpected questions. What do you do if? Gee, the thermocouple breaks. You run out of material. So it's a very good way of finding out what's going on within the organization. And typically the answer will be, go see my supervisor. If they are the supervisor, then hopefully they can give you a better answer than that. There's a way of just restating the requirements. So, hey, the standard says that we're supposed to control documents. What does that mean to you? How do you guys control your documents? How do you know that there's only the current revision is available? What happens to the old ones when they're replaced? And especially if they're paper copies, who's got the responsibility for grabbing those and taking them out, getting them replaced? How do you meet the requirements for non-destructive evaluation, inspection, qualification? So turn the requirement into a question, determine the answer. Again, if you've read the procedure ahead of time, you already know what they should be doing. Is that indeed what the answers are that you received and what the records demonstrate? Leading questions, I don't advise leading questions. Some auditors can use them effectively, but they definitely put the auditee on edge. They feel that they're being trapped. And if you give that perception, they're going to be less likely to be forthcoming in their answers. So it is a valid technique for asking questions, but use it very judiciously. Don't jeopardize the long-term success of the audit program by trying to trap individuals or making them feel that they're being trapped. See, if the inspector can't be here to verify the first piece, you're under a gun to get the job out the door. Just go ahead and continue production, or what will you do? Pressure gauge is just slightly off. It's still okay, isn't it? It's just a guideline. So there's ways of asking it. I discourage the leading questions. Naive questions, if you're fans of the old-time Sunday night mystery movies with Columbo, he was the best example of asking naive questions. Again, the assumption is you know the right answer, but you ask the question as if you don't understand anything and make them explain it to you. It's as long as you don't come off sounding fake. Naive questions can be very effective because it draws out more of a open-ended answer out of the client, out of the auditee, to make sure how well they understand what it is that they're doing by how well they can explain what they're doing. So naive questions can be effective as long as you don't come off fake in the audit. Again, coming off fake raises a red flag to the auditee, makes them feel trapped, and like you're looking for problems instead of looking for conformance. And there's a time and place just to be quiet, just to observe, watch, listen to what's going on. Listen to the equipment. Does it sound screaming like there's metal on metal rubbing and maybe lack of effective maintenance? Is there a lot of clutter and dirt and miscellaneous stuff laying around that gets in the way of a good, smooth workflow? Are people hustling back and forth instead of moving in a deliberate fashion? And all those things play into the results of the audit and where we look for further concerns. So while we're doing the audit, we're looking at any documents, any forms, any instructions in the work area, and identify the document, the rev level. That's your you can trace that back then to document control. Gee, what's the most recent version that's been published? So are those indeed the versions that are being used? Who are you interviewing in the different areas? That follows up at the end of the audit. You go into the training and competency records that who did you speak to, and are they indeed competent? Are there records for that? What equipment was being used? And you look to see the maintenance history of those pieces of equipment. What measuring equipment were they using in the work cell and in inspection? Is there calibration records to go with all that equipment? So those don't require asking anyone any question, but that's your audit trails that you're developing as you go through the audits. And again, as you interview operators and floor personnel, talk to more than one. Make sure that you're getting consistent responses. Once you've done all that, you've completed the audit. The lead auditor is responsible for turning that into the audit report, submitting it to the auditee and the client. And if there's any non-conformances, those non-conformances need to be clearly identified and reported in a way that facilitates the auditee in initiating and completing the corrective actions to get those resolved and cleaned up. But the audit is not closed, is not completed until all the audit non-conformances have been dealt with. As you go over the audit results in the non-conformances at the closing meeting, don't wait till a week after or 2 weeks after the audit to give the non-conformances to the auditee. They need to know those right at the closure of the on-site audit activities, and give them in order of significance. That don't go by the order of the standard. And what's the most critical findings first, then more minor ones, and then any opportunities you saw for them to improve their operations, you can add that at the end. Be careful not to consult or take ownership of the problems as you do so. In order to close out, then you've provided the findings, the nonconformities to the auditee. Look at their response. This is what we plan to do. Here's when it's going to be done by. Here's who's going to do it. So you negotiate that plan as necessary if you don't think that they have adequately identified the root cause or put together an effective response strategy, or if they're rushing it too fast because you think it's a bigger problem and it's going to take more resources to fix than they're throwing at it. Or conversely, if they say that we'll have this done by the end of the year, and there's no reason it shouldn't be done by the end of the month. So timely response to the nonconformities is very critical. So once you've negotiated any of that, get the final response, determine based on the response they gave you, you can close it out on that information, or do you need a follow-up audit? If there's a follow-up audit, that follow-up audit is limited in scope just to the nonconformity or nonconformities you need to evaluate for effectiveness in the activity. And that follow-up audit obviously cannot happen until it's been fully implemented and time has been allowed for that to become the new standard practice. Because that's how you're evaluating the effectiveness, is they have fixed the problem. Once all that is done and you can sign off all of the individual nonconformities, then the audit itself is closed and you can move on and make sure that that gets communicated not just to the auditee, but to the client as well. And if you are not getting a response from the auditee, then make sure that you escalate that up the chain of command and get that communicated to the client to push back and get the responses you need. So there's several more slides on that, on root cause, corrective action plans. I'm sure all of you as quality engineers, quality managers, you understand those things. The basic flow that we just talked about is the same. So I want to speed through the rest of these so we've got time for some questions here. Is it effective? Is the response appropriate to what you found? And is it indeed effective? Does it support the standard? One of the things too with the new standards focus on risk management is the response they give you. Are there potential unexpected consequences of the fix that they put in that can cause other things to break? We want to think bigger picture. How is that going to affect the rest of the organization while we do the review? So making sure we respond to any failures to respond. Again, follow-up audits give time to generate objective evidence. We also, audits themselves are a process. We want to make sure that our audit program, whether internal supplier audits or third-party audits, are they effective? So we want to measure that performance, the results, and are we as an organization, are our suppliers, are our clients getting better as a result of the audit activity? So with that, we've got a few minutes here to answer any questions. So Adam, if you want to get on, I don't see questions here, but please type, or if you want to open up the phones, that's welcome also.
Yeah, so please type any questions you might have in the questions interface. We had a few questions earlier. Unfortunately, a few technical difficulties that we were unable to, I believe we were not able to resolve. My apologies for that. Some questions about the slides being available, and the answer to that is that we will post the slides from this presentation on the Statistics Division website, asq.org/statistics. And then we'll get it started here. There's a question. If you could go back to slide 21, John. Sorry, you go back to slide 21, Dan.
Okay.
There was a question on the last bullet point. The question is, did you describe a helmet audit? The person was not sure if they heard the correct word.
All right. No, I've not heard of a helmet audit. So I don't see anything here on audit preparation regarding helmets.
Do you
was
recall
that
perhaps what you might have said to correct? I don't, maybe not, but.
Okay. I apologize if I didn't speak clearly.
Okay.
So no, there's no helmet audit.
Okay. Thank you very much. That actually appears to be the last of the questions.
Wow.
So
I
hold on, we have a couple more that came up.
Okay. I know I spoke pretty quickly through some of those slides, but again, trying to fill 3 days into 1 hour.
Yep. So here's another question. I believe it is possible to make up checklists for a process. Can you comment on that?
Yes. And again, if you start with a process map or process turtle, then the questions can almost be generic. Yeah. Who's responsible for the activities of the process? Who's measuring the results of the process? How are those metrics shared with the team members responsible for the process? So efficiency, on-time delivery, scrap rates, is that being shared with the employees, or is that data being held by management? How are they communicated, what the expectations are? How are the results recorded? Are there written records? Is it all electronic? How do employees know what they're supposed to do and how they tell a good outcome from a bad outcome. It's oftentimes very simple in production by looking at the part and it meets spec or it doesn't. But if it's an in-process part, maybe it can't meet specification because there's further machining being done. But is there an in-process measurement that they check? Do the employees verify the work from those previous to them before they start adding more value to this part? Those are all kinds of standard questions you can talk about with any individual process.
Okay. The next question is, can an audit be closed even though the corrective action is not fully done? For example, if the CA will take several months.
Technically, the audit stays open, as long as the actions are open. The exception, I would say, is if a year goes, if this area is typically audited once a year, and now you're at the next audit time, and those actions are still open, then I would close out the old audit activity and reopen a new corrective action, which would be an escalation unless it was agreed that that this would be a long-term fix. But if they indeed had not fixed it by the time of the next audit, it would be escalated likely to a major for failure to respond, and could result in additional nonconformance for not following the nonconformance procedure. If the fix is long-term, then you certainly need to assess what the short-term corrections are to make sure that the risk is mitigated until you can have that permanent fix. Say it requires a brand new press, which is a couple of $100,000. Well, are there stop gaps so that the existing equipment is capable of producing conforming product, maybe not at the rates that management wants, or we need to do more inspection or sorting? What are the controls being used until then? But indeed, we need to get those findings closed in order to close the audit itself.
Okay, thank you. The next question, have you mentioned remote audits and the auditing of electronic QMSs? I know that a leading certification is well on with evaluating remote auditing.
Yes, and that'd be a different form of a desk audit. And I guess I could update my slides accordingly, but I don't think the body of knowledge and the exam have updated to reflect that, but it's fairly new. At Eagle, we call that computer assisted audit techniques, or a CAT audit. And yes, there are ways of doing that, but it's essentially a desk audit where through Skype video conferencing, just like the webinar we're on, and online access. Several of the companies I audit, their ERP, their documentation, their records, everything is all online because they're a multi-site company and everyone has live access to the system through the internet. And that is an accepted audit process.
All right, so another question is, how can we ensure the consistency between auditors? Many times audits are perceived as subjective.
That's the audit program manager's responsibility to, one, ensure that the audit team has been properly trained and to monitor their ongoing performance. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. The simplest is to get feedback from the auditees. The most time-consuming is to do witness audits, where the audit program manager actually participates in the audit with the individual auditors, and just they aren't doing the audit with the auditor, they're watching the auditor doing that. And I've been witness audited for Eagle and NSAI by both internal resources to Eagle and the American National Accreditation Board, ANAB, has witnessed me as part of their audits and oversight of Eagle. All of that is for the purposes of making sure that the auditors meet the requirements of the standard.
All right. Well, thank you again very much, Dan. That appears to be the last of the questions, and we're 1 minute past 1, so it's a good time to stop. It was a very good presentation. We now ask that our attendees complete the short survey available within GoToWebinar. A recording of the webinar will be available within a few days on the division's YouTube channel at youtube.com/ASQStatsDivision. Please be sure to share this webinar and our other archived webinars with friends, coworkers, and colleagues. We also encourage you to check out the division's LinkedIn page and our events calendar, which can be viewed at asq.org/statistics for the latest news on webinars, conferences, and many other topics. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you again, Dan. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.